Charles, King Felipe VI's secret Parisian boyfriend, a 10-year relationship and a special role in Letizia's dark days. In a shocking revelation for the Spanish royal family, veteran journalist Joaquin Abad has revealed in his latest book a secret that was allegedly kept for years at the Zarzuela Palace. King Felipe VI had a deep emotional relationship with a man named Charles, which lasted for a decade and was closely associated with the king during the most difficult times of his life, especially when Letizia was in personal and marital crisis. A secret kept behind royal gates. In the Spanish press, Joaquin Abad is no stranger. With many years of experience investigating politics, royalty and secrets hidden from the public, Abad has shocked the public this time when writing about the most private aspect of Felipe VI's love life, something that no one has dared to make public before. According to Abad, since he was crown prince, Felipe VI has always shown a special attraction to men. It is not simply the friendliness or closeness often seen in leaders, but also an ability to create deep and emotional connections, to the point that, as he wrote, Felipe always seems to feel most himself when he is with men. The journalist said that the Spanish royal family, especially within the Zarzuela Palace, has repeatedly expressed discomfort with this emotional tendency of the king. They do not accept this hobby of Felipe, they want a standard image of a traditional king, husband, father, Abad emphasized. As a result, many of his close relationships with men were forced to remain in the shadows. Charles, true and lasting love. However, among the men who passed through Felipe VI's life, which, according to Abad, could have numbered as many as 10, only one truly left a deep and lasting impression: Charles. Charles, a Frenchman living in Paris, is said to have had a quiet but intense affair with Felipe VI that lasted more than 10 years. They met during a business trip of the Spanish crown prince to France and quickly developed a friendship that grew into something deeper. Charles was not a man of politics or entertainment. On the contrary, he was a reserved, educated man with a passion for art and philosophy, things that bonded him with Felipe over hours of conversation. According to Abad, during that time, Felipe and Charles met regularly in Paris, an ideal city to fall in love without fear of being noticed. They strolled along the Seine, attended small classical concerts, or simply sat quietly by the window of a café watching people pass by. Although Felipe married Letizia Ortiz in 2004 and became king in 2014, his relationship with Charles did not end completely. Abad writes that during Felipe's marital crises, especially when Letizia was stressed, and showed signs of wanting to step down as queen, it was Charles who was there to support and encourage the king. Charles never asked for anything. He did not interfere in Felipe's political or family life. He was simply present, as a confidant, a silent but persistent lover, the book notes. Letizia and the dark days. During the most difficult period of Felipe VI and Letizia's marriage, believed to have been around the mid-2010s, when Letizia suffered a personal crisis due to royal pressure and lost her bearings in her role, King Felipe was caught in a dilemma. As a husband, he wanted to save the marriage, but as a man, he found relief and deep understanding in Charles's presence. According to sources who worked in Zarzuela and quoted by Abad, Felipe would often leave the palace in silence at night, only to call or go to Paris for a few days to see Charles, as a way to recharge his emotional batteries, before returning to face reality. However, like all love affairs that cannot be made public in the royal world, the relationship between Felipe and Charles gradually faded. Responsibility, national image and the role of father forced the king to withdraw from the secret world where he had found love and peace. In the end, Charles, who had always been silent and respectful of every decision, chose to quietly withdraw from Felipe's life. Quiet and noble. Charles never appeared in the newspapers. Not a single photo of him with Felipe was ever leaked. He lived as a shadow, but a shadow that shaded the king's soul for more than a decade. Joaquin Abad concludes the book with an emotional passage. One can argue about Charles' role, lover or just confidant, but what cannot be denied is that his presence created a very human, very real part of a man who was always bound by duty and image. With these revelations, the Spanish public will certainly have mixed reactions. But above all, the story of Felipe and Charles can make us see the king in a more human light, not just as a ruler, but as a man who has loved, suffered, and had to choose between heart and duty. Love in the dark, and the limits that cannot be crossed. The relationship between Felipe VI and Charles, as described by journalist Joaquin Abad, never had the chance to step into the light. In a world where royal tradition still upholds the image of a model king, a faithful husband and a model father, same-sex love, no matter how sincere, is unacceptable. Especially in the Zarzuela Palace, where every action, every look, even every breath of the king is closely monitored, freedom to love is a luxury. However, it is precisely this limit that makes the relationship between Felipe and Charles more sacred and profound. They do not need titles, do not have romantic photos together, do not appear in public. Their love was nurtured by long conversations that lasted all night, by affectionate glances during quick meetings in Paris, or simply by handwritten letters that, according to Abad, Felipe kept in his own drawer. Once, when Letizia fell into a deep depression and considered withdrawing from the royal family, Felipe stayed in Paris for almost a week with Charles, something that had never happened before. Those close to him said that it was a time when the king was on the verge of collapse and recovery. And it was Charles who reminded him of responsibility, of ideals, and that love is not necessarily possession. Did Letizia know or not? The question is, did Letizia, Philippe's legal wife, know about Charles? Joaquin Abad did not make a direct statement, but he left many details open that showed that Letizia was not naive. She is an intelligent, sharp woman and a former famous television journalist. It was not difficult for her to recognize the emotional distance between herself and her husband, especially during the most difficult moments of their marriage. A source close to the Queen quoted in the book said, "She didn't ask, he didn't tell, but there was an understanding between them. Letizia was very angry, but then she accepted, because they both had one thing in common: they loved this royal family and didn't want to break it." Perhaps that is why, over time, the relationship between Letizia and Felipe gradually returned to stability, at least on the surface. They appeared together at events, raised 2 daughters together and maintained a solid image of the Spanish royal family. But, like every royal marriage, what we see is just the tip of a very large iceberg. Where is Charles now? After Felipe ascended the throne in 2014, Charles's presence became increasingly obscure. The king's trips to Paris became less frequent, and secret meetings became rare. No one knows exactly where Charles lives. Some sources say he has moved to the south of France, living discreetly in a small town near Aix-en-Provence. Others say he has settled in Belgium, where there is a relatively large French-speaking intellectual community. It is worth noting that Charles has never spoken out, never written a book, never leaked any information about his relationship with the king. He has remained as quiet as when he arrived, and perhaps will remain so forever. It is this silence that, according to many, is the clearest proof of Charles's sincere affection and unconditional loyalty to Felipe VI. A private chapter that has never been acknowledged. At the end of the book, Joaquin Abad does not call for public criticism of the royal family or demand a confession from the king. On the contrary, he wrote, "Love has many forms. There are relationships that do not need to be legalized, do not need declarations or wedding rings, but still live forever in the hearts of those involved. Felipe VI loved, not in the way people expected, but very real, very deep.